Welcome to Theorycraft, a live podcast where game designers and players engage in conversation. So, off the bat, we'd like to thank Kevin for being a co-host for the last couple months, and we are looking to cycle in some more hosts and guest hosts, maybe even more often going forward. We've obviously had kind of a bit of time off, probably a lot to catch up on what everybody has been up to. So, I guess I'll start with you, Candace, because I know you were bouncing around. You went to the UK for a little bit. What's been up in your world?
Yeah, that was wild. So my partner, his dad is in failing health, and we were terrified the whole pandemic that we wouldn't be able to see him before he goes. And the UK actually opened their borders to America without having to quarantine. So the way it works is there's like red countries and yellow countries or something and green countries. And the countries that you enter the UK from that are red, you have to quarantine for 10 days. You have to like provide your location and your COVID test or whatever. Yellow though, the US is yellow. And only because they finally recognized the Pfizer vaccine. They still haven't recognized the Moderna vaccine, but now there is a recognized vaccine by the UK. And so if you're vaccinated and you come from a yellow country, then you can stay without quarantining, but you still have to you have to produce a negative COVID test within 72 hours of arriving. And this is like a government. You have to go to a special place that actually can communicate with the government and the airlines, like they share it with the airlines. And so you can't just like fake a test and bring it in. And then 2 days after you land, you have to take another COVID test that you send to another like government facility. Mine was called like Arrive UK or something like that. And they partner with the government. Then that has to be negative, or else they come to your location that you put down on your paper and you're quarantined. And then whenever you leave, you have to produce another negative COVID test. So since I was only there for a week, it was like I tested for COVID 2 days before I left, and then 2 days after I landed, and then 3 days into it, I did another COVID test, and then I got home. And what's funny is I didn't get COVID. I tested again when I got home just for my own peace of mind.
Congrats on that.
I get a wicked ass stomach flu, so that was fun.
Oh, that sucks. You can't dodge every bullet, I guess. And that also, man, that sounds fucking strenuous considering your reasons for going over there too. I thought you were giving a talk or a panel over there for some reason, but maybe I was mistaken.
Yeah, no, we just wanted to see family. And so we, like the day after our COVID test was negative, we saw the highest risk, the elderly father. We knew that we were, clear. And then it was just risking it the whole time you're there. Like, well, if you test positive for COVID, then you don't get to come home. And what's wild is, so we had spent lots of time with the family Saturday. Then on Sunday and Monday, we were supposed to go to London. And then on Wednesday after we got home, it's hard because there was a time difference and time is all fucked up for me. When we got home, then one of his family members that we had seen on Saturday had tested positive for COVID. And so we're like, oh, we should take another test. So actually, we got a rapid test and a PCR test just to make sure that like we didn't get COVID from the family member. But it's weird over there because they're going broad instead of deep with the vaccines. So the way that it works in England is you can get your first jab if you're within like certain age range. You can only get your second jab if you're in another age range. So the woman who tested positive for COVID, she was in an age range that's still not eligible for a second jab until like 2 months from now. Yeah, but her parents that she was staying with, who have both jabs, are not COVID positive. So
yeah,
it was just wild. Like, I'm glad I got to go over there. It certainly wasn't as fun as it could have been. Like if it was a pleasure trip where we go to restaurants and, have a great time and go to like the tours. None of the tours are open, nothing like that. So, and the whole time you're like, my hands were just completely destroyed by sanitizer.
Yeah.
I'm not going to risk coming home. But yeah, it was a good trip overall. Flying was interesting. Flying home, our plane turned around 2 hours after we started flying, and they're like, "Oh, we're going back to Heathrow. There's technical difficulty."
Fuck.
So I'm like figuring that out. There's a lot of things. Yeah. There's a lot of things that can stop a flight from being cleared to cross the Atlantic. Some of which are like GPS is actually not usually a big deal, but like radar, where the plane can know how high it is off the ground, basically, and where it is based like the rest of the planes in the sky,
right.
Or like. There's like a de-icer that if that sensor is not working as they want it to, even if it's not icy. If it's like summer, it will be icy at 35,000 feet. But yeah, so we got 2 hours into our flight, and then they brought us right the fuck back to Heathrow, and then we waited another 3 hours to get on a different plane and then go home. So I can't recommend flying right now. It's a shit show.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't. Well, welcome back. I had no idea it was that much of an event, but I should have known.
I'm never leaving my house.
Dude, really, that's the play. that is actually the move. Like I left the country last Friday to go back to the States for what I just thought was a weekend. I drove to Seattle, and I had zero problem getting down across the U.S. border. They didn't require anything of me. It's just as a U.S. citizen crossing the border, they're like, go ahead. So I'm like, wow, this is going to be straightforward. So 3 days later, when I tried to come home, I, being the fool that I am, had not pre-taken one of these tests within the 72-hour window. So I was turned away at the border at like 9:30 on Sunday night, and they sent me. I just went back to like the closest city and booked a hotel. And the next morning, started trying to find tests. You can't use a rapid test to cross. You need a PCR one. And like the first couple places the border guard had recommended didn't even have appointments till the end of the fucking week. So I'm like, wow, I'm fully just going to be stuck in the States for like a week and a half unplanned now, just on my own dime. So, and coming from Canada now, that stings. I mean, the Canadian peso is like, you don't want to be spending more than you have to. But I managed to find something pretty quick and then just played the waiting game. I finally got home this fucking afternoon. Like normally I would enjoy just kicking it in Bellingham and like, going to antique stores and hanging out down by the water and visiting my favorite places. But that sense of like the loss of control really sucks.
Anxiety, yeah.
And totally. You're just fucking playing hurry up and wait and like clocking out and clocking back into the same hotel over and over. I started to have some sympathy for my friends that I know that were touring musicians over time. I'm like, man, you just kind of like, I felt gross basically every day from not having like fully been home. And I can't even imagine doing that for months and months on end in a van in a Walmart parking lot. But yeah, we made it. But similarly, I was just like, I'm not going back to the fucking States anytime soon. Like that was a lot of to do. I'm going to try to have my mom come visit me up here, but I'm already starting to think like, how many tests is she going to have to get? Is it worth it to put her through this? So we'll see. It's wild, though. You start to really feel like Canada is also, I think, a crown country, and we're doing the same thing of going wide, not deep with vaccines. They really were spreading everybody's doses way out. And you really feel the difference going down into the States, which, of course, has like bought up most of the supply. Because like I was just randomly doom scrolling last night, and a bunch of people were talking about boosters. And like I just got my shot, a month and a half ago, so I'm not trying to boost or whatever, but I mean, you can just walk into stores in the States and just pop a vax. They just list on the site like, oh, we've got Moderna here. We've got Moderna and Pfizer here. It just felt to me like, wow, what a buffet of vaccines, if you just happen to live in the States. Whereas in Canada, it's like, I just have to sit down and wait my turn to be called after like 4 months. And so different reality. But we'll see how that is going into the future. Chris, do you have any public health stories to share since that's where we're going today?
Yeah, I'm just thinking it's like, yeah, it's COVID, it's a thing, like, right? Like, it has totally affected our entire daily lives and everything. I traveled to NorCal, but it was pretty painless. Like, it was 45-hour flight, and I don't know, it was kind of fun. I did that. I was gone for like half a week or so and came back, and then I was babysitting my friend's dog. Julie and Tina's dog, Canis, and Maple. And for 2 weeks while they were in Europe, in France. And so they had their own kind of drama with flying and COVID and all of that. But yeah, they made it out alive. They're back. The dog's gone. Now I kind of want to adopt a dog now. I was like, I've had a dog for 2 weeks. I was like, oh, I kind of like that experience.
Oh, man.
Yeah. But I've been playing a lot of... just to move into games, I'm playing a lot of that Aliens Fireteam game. I really like that game. It's like a shooter roguelike sort of game.
Okay.
It's like similar to this game GTFO, if you guys know that game. People were playing that game, I think, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. It's kind of like you're in an elevator and you keep going up to new levels and you fight hordes of mobs, and it's like if you die, it's like you lose progress and stuff like that. So Yeah, I'm enjoying it. It has a really cool perk system. I think I even posted it in our Discord. Yeah, what do you guys play?
I jumped back onto the Destiny train, so I'm getting past the. You come back and you're at 1100 light level, so you got to get up to like 1400 or so to raid and stuff. So it's not a very friendly experience where I don't know what I should do and I have to ask people who do play the game what I should do.
Yeah.
And I played that Back for Blood weekend that it was open. That was dope.
Did you like it? I heard mixed things. Some friends of mine who loved what's it called?
Left for Dead.
Left 4 Dead PvP didn't really like it or something, but
I thought it was. I thought it was a. It was a soul sister to Left 4 Dead. It feels like Left 4 Dead with new characters and a bit more involved of a storyline. They added some roguelike-ish elements where there are these cards that you can get that change the way you play the game. So like some of them are really small, like you get one more extra res or you reload 20% faster or whatever. But I get the feeling that that's just the introductory, like the white tier cards, gray tier cards. I have a feeling there's going to be more rare ones that feel good. So you can get these cards in your deck, but you have to draw them at the beginning of the run as well. So you're not like Hearthstone, you're not guaranteed a certain order. At least that's what I think. And then the more you play, the more of those cards you can get. And so it's not just playing for joy. You're like kind of chasing some sort of tail to the end game, or not end game, but like to a different experience. And then also there are these optional objectives that are like some of them are really wacky. Like there's this part of the experience where you cross a bridge, and then once you cross the bridge, that's the checkpoint. It's like, okay, that chapter is over. You're going to start the next chapter. You're going to draw new cards and stuff like that. And the challenge was to escape across the bridge with like a horde of enemies chasing you. And like we had been so on top of the monsters, we had to kind of like wait on the boat for a long time for like enemies to spawn so that we could achieve that. It was kind of odd, but it was fun. I thought it was good. I can see the potential for there to be a lot of really cool replayability, almost like roguelike progression in the game. And so I think it's good. I'll play it for sure. I mean, I have like 200 something hours in Left 4 Dead, so
Yeah, just looking at it, I was trying to figure out what you meant by the cards beforehand in terms of how those modifiers played out. And this really does seem like a very direct extension of Left 4 Dead because they're mentioning that there's like the AI director, which can use corruption cards against you to hinder your progress on these kind of runs as well. So it does sound really dynamic. Yeah. Do you play with, like, do you have a crew that you're rolling with, or are you just going in and soloing it? And I guess that goes for you too with Fire Team, Chris. I don't know. I figured it was kind of co-op-y to some degree, but maybe I don't know.
I mean, you can't play solo. You have to have 4 humans to start and either matchmake for you, which is I always like those games. Ugh. But
You're right.
it's just it feels really weird to have to play with strangers. But then if the strangers drop, there's bots, and so that the bots are there. Give me those bots. They're not great.
I'd be hoping for that, honestly. Sounds way less anxious.
So that's the long con is you start and you get random match made with random assholes you don't like that are like, buy a gun for me, Jezebel. Can you buy this gun for me, please, Jezebel? And you're like, oh God, just shut up. Yes. And then they leave eventually, and then you can keep playing and enjoying the game whenever the bots eventually replace them. You just have to keep spinning that group because once you lose that precious bot group, you're just
yeah. In Fireteam, I am playing in a squad. You pretty much have to play that game. I don't even know if you can queue solo. Yeah, you might be able to, and you queue with like 2 NPCs. But yeah, I play in a group. I play in a squad, and it's a lot of fun playing in a squad that game. The medic in the game, there's like a healer medic, and I always play a healer in every game. And it's the whole system is very convoluted and there's no way they're not going to change it. Essentially, it's just like there's 3 med packs at each choke point or each checkpoint. Mm-hmm. And if you're the medic, you have like a healing turret, but the only way it can increase its energy, because it depletes in energy and it can refill, but the only way to refill it is for you to loot all of the med packs. And so you can imagine what happens. Like all your allies are like, I want a med pack. I use the med pack on myself. I want to loot the med pack. And the medic is like, don't touch the med packs. I need to use it to refill my energy for everybody, right? And it's it creates like fights with players. It's just not good. So curious to see what to do about that. But other than that, it's a really great game. It's very immersive. The combat's great. The perk system is good. A lot of good things. So
Can you generate your own med packs? Just not as fast as they can be
no.
found in the
Mm-mm. They just come, the game gives. The reason why they limit them is because they had to balance assuming there is no medic. So at every choke point, they put 3 med packs. So if there's no medic, the team loots them individually. If there is a medic, the medic replenishes her or his juice, basically. But,
ideally.
Yeah, ideally. But other people loot them because I need it, and they don't understand the mechanic because only you understand it, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
You gotta get your squad in line, though. They can't be.
Yeah, and the team I play with, it's not a problem, but
they get
I can only imagine in like a match-made group, right?
Yeah, kind of prisoner's dilemma-y light, or just everybody's having a worse outcome if somebody steals a med pack for themselves. Also, it would feel shitty playing a medic and like not being able to refill your juice, period, just because of like what your teammates are doing.
Yeah.
Huh. I also have been gaming. I finished the Mass Effect trilogy handily about probably around the time we last talked, and then I started playing the Ascent, which we kind of mentioned on a previous podcast, but I don't think anyone of us had experience with yet. And I'm super into it. It is, I guess I'm still on my sci-fi kick. The game sounds, as I predicted, fucking great. It's really punchy. All the guns and powers and augments have really interesting audio. I find it very immersive. Like the art in it and the multi-layered kind of arcology that you're in feels like way deeper than I want to say that it is, because it's a fixed camera angle and there are a lot of tricks pulled off. But the environment evolves quite a bit for a fixed camera angle. It's a twin stick, kind of isometric action RPG shooter, kind of like a cyberpunk Diablo sort of thing. But I'm fucking loving it. The only thing that I wish were buttoned up a little better on it is that it kind of falls into that cyberpunk trap of just like bludgeoning you over the head with vocab to let you know that it's a cyberpunk game. So like right off the bat, they're hitting you up with, we got to rescue these habbers from the idents and use this net sage to coordinate with your stack boss. And it's just like all these terms, and they're writing them all in camel case, which is kind of programmery. And it's like, I don't know. The shooting and everything feels great. So it's fine that stuff's window dressing. And again, the environments and the soundtrack are so gorgeous that you're pulled in anyways. But I've been having a rad time with it. I like that you're able to go to areas difficulty-wise on maps that you're really not supposed to be at yet. It doesn't scale everything. And the penalties for death are not so severe. Basically just pops you back to the last checkpoint really quickly with everything kind of refilled, including the experience you might have gained before you died too. So this lets you kind of like keep trying to poke and prod into higher level areas and see if you can like squeeze out a couple kills on, skull enemies you probably shouldn't be dealing with, just to fish for like higher level loot, or just like completely roadblock yourself being like, I want to get into this skull level area and like loot this chest I can see on my map, like really stubbornly. And I don't know, when you pull that stuff off and you manage to obtain like a slightly overpowered piece of gear, you feel like a badass for the next stretch of story and everything. And it's like, I just like that it kind of like gives you the option to go deeper than you should and get a little out of your depth. So yeah, I've been having a fun time with that. It's also on-screen co-opable, so maybe I'll play it with some friends at some point. There's been a lot of news. It's been a long time. We always talk about Blizzard stuff. Do we want to just like head off this kind of 9.1.5 discussion right off the bat? Like obviously the lawsuit is continuing to proceed. More changes are being made culturally. McCree's being renamed. But like I could not believe this patch just like completely cowing to everything that people have been requesting of Shadowlands from day one. Like it seems like it really came out of nowhere. You know what I mean? Like X.5 patches are not generally, here we're opening the box and giving you everything you want. The way the letter was written made it sound like it's a 0.5 patch. So this is what we do. These are our, like open a dump truck of quality of life fixes on you. Like, what do you two think? I mean, Candace, are you guys familiar with?
So just maybe like quickly.
Yeah. What did they change?
What are the main beats in it, right? Like,
yeah. So basically, covenants are completely unlocked now. You can swap at will. They're making it easier for you to gain renown in said covenants, apparently. They're letting you skip parts of these campaigns on your alts once you've gone past a certain point. They're full on removing conduit energy, which, as we know, is, the cooldown in between switching conduits within your soulbind trees. And like, they really are just basically pulling the ripcord. They're removing all the barriers to the sort of forced identity, or like the pledged identity that was, the 4 covenant arc of going into Shadowlands. From their explanation, it's like, well, this is a time where it sort of narratively made sense to do this.
Yeah, I think that's where the trust was lost. I was listening to Bellular talk about it, and the sentiment on, it's just Twitter, which doesn't really reflect everybody's opinion, like, quite obviously, but
No.
Yeah, making like the Moss skippable for your alts, like trying to make it more friendly for alts, like completely understand where the changes are coming from. It definitely is a backpedaling away from we really want you to have an identity, right? We don't want you to just be a paladin. We want you to be a Venthyr paladin, which is what they had been, which was the goal of making those choices, like, quote unquote, meaningful. But it's the same thing that we had talked about earlier, where like it is a meaningful choice in that you can't undo your decision once it's made very easily. That's effective at making a meaningful choice, but it loses the rest of the meaningful choice whenever you don't have enough information to make the choice, whenever you're presented the choice for as an example, or like you don't understand the downsides of the choice. The choice also changes over time, and you don't trust that it's going to stay tuned the way it is. Like, there's a lot of factors that go around. Like, it wasn't a satisfying choice to make in the first place, so making people stick with it for the entire expansion, as predicted, fell kind of flat, which kind of sucked. But what Bellular was saying, at least, and I'm not sure, like, I 100% agree with this, but like and then the explanation for, like, okay, we're going to give you everything you wanted. We're going to give you all the stuff that you asked for since beta, instead of saying like, hey, we thank you for all of your feedback and we really appreciate it. And as a result of your feedback, we have decided to make these changes because we like you. It was like, well, narratively, it makes sense to make these changes, so we're going to do it now, instead of kind of acknowledging like, hey, this is, we hear you, we know that this is what you want, and so we did it, and no, like,
Right, like this was
no, like, we've
the whole
learned
plan.
something.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have, I don't believe that people should have to personally apologize. Like, people are like, Ian Hazzard should apologize. Meh. Like, it was a bold choice. They tried, because people do like that meaningful choices exist in Classic. They tried to make a meaningful choice. It just didn't work out the way that they thought it was going to work out. And so they backpedaled. So, but it was a great opportunity to make the player base feel heard. And I think that that's where they fell flat, making those changes. So it's like they got the worst of both worlds, right? Like, they had to change the game. They had to step back from their vision, and they had to pivot the direction of the game. And then also they didn't get any cred for doing, not any cred, but like they didn't get any points with the player base because they didn't admit wrongdoing, or even say like, we've learned from this, you're trying to make this the best possible experience. Like, that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, they did with conduit energy. They were like, this was just bad. But with everything else, there was still like a little bit of kind of like prideful sort of like backpedaling about why it made sense to do it now. They didn't fully just say like, boy, what a dumb idea this stuff was. Like,
This feels like the kind of thing, if Yoshi P had said it, it would have been like a tearful apology. I'm not saying that should happen. I'm just saying that, like,
it would have been.
Yeah.
And he would be in full cosplay,
Yep.
Oh,
yep.
Yoshi P. The comeback game of all comeback games. That's like, it just keeps coming back. Final Fantasy 14.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought, it's just gonna be sort of, it's just not great to like list in the list of features, like, we're removing this thing that they added, like the conduit energy or whatever it is, within a couple of years ago, And the thing is, like, this has happened multiple times in the last several years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever it is. And so, how it just doesn't look good, right? And so I think players are happy with some of the changes, but then they're also just like, why does this keep happening, sort of thing, And hopefully, the team is sort of reflecting on that and figuring out, why does that keep happening, So
yes, that is the next chapter in this saga that's probably been going since Legion, I think. I mean, I came back for 735 and definitely started to feel like, oh, this is maybe the shape of expansions now. And the meta sort of narrative around the design of these games has just been like, it sucks. There's stuff in there that, players warned against, wasn't listened to, and then it finally gets patched as a quality of life. Like, I can't believe that this happened. And I can't, at this juncture, basically. Like, I can't believe that it happened in 9.1.5. I think it's pretty significant. Like, even if we all knew it was going to happen eventually, this still feels like more of an admission than, folks have had to date on this design track. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I mean, everybody just seems to be like, thanks, but also this shouldn't have been the case. And I'll see you on the PTR for 10.0. And until then, like, I don't know what to trust, I don't know. I don't even know. I can't even say if it's too little, too late or anything like that because I haven't played Shadowlands since like a month after release. But it's nice that they're reforming it for the folks that are still hanging out. I wonder how many people were like really on the fence and then this has just been like, this was the nudge they needed to keep hanging in, I wonder.
To keep hanging into what? I'm sorry?
Oh, just to playing WoW. Like if you were on the cusp of being like, okay, I'm finally hitting my burnout here.
Churn, basically, yeah.
Right.
I mean, really what's going to bring them back is like another major content patch of like really new experiences, new raids, dungeons, that sort of thing.
That hold up, yeah.
Yeah, so that won't be this patch, right? It'll probably be the one after.
Yep.
Yeah, if I were to put on my game director hat, then the next patch that I would release would guns blazing take advantage of all of those changes and make all of those changes feel fucking amazing. Like either like an alt Ludapalooza where you're leveling up your alts and now it's amazing because conduits or because covenants are like easier or whatever. Like really double down on the decision and fully realize like the new picture of the game, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of like 735. Like it felt like you basically like clicked one single artifact token you found out of a chest next to a fucking tree, and then suddenly you could select like 38 talents. Like they really just let you jump in towards the end of that, and I loved it. And I don't think they really need to be afraid of that. It suddenly just felt like, man, I can get to playing really quickly. Anywho, this story about China restricting games to 3 online games, specifically to 3 hours a week for youth, really jumped out at me too. I work at a company that was acquired by Tencent at the beginning of the year. And this seems like a really severe clamp. 3 hours a fucking week? Like, are you kidding me? I can't think of like a single week as a kid where that would have been a satisfying amount of gaming for me.
Is that any children under a certain, what age was that? I didn't read all of it. Isn't that 1 hour a day, but only on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday?
Yes, you're right. That Monday through Thursday, I believe there's no play, and then it's during specific hours. It's 3 hours a week, and since it's youth, I think 18 is the upper bound. Chris, do you remember off the top of your head? Like it's not for all gamers; it's for younger folks.
Well, it's for younger gamers. I don't know what the cutoff of the age.
Okay,
let me look real quick.
It's funny because it might have this backfire effect where now there's an audience of people who already don't have a lot of patience are playing games, and maybe they're playing pay-to-win games, and maybe it just incentivizes them to want to value their playtime even more, i.e. spend more money. I mean, it could have a backfiring effect. I'm not sure. I don't keep my finger on the pulse of Chinese minor community.
It's under 18.
Community.
Under 18. So once you're up to age 17 in China, basically. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I mean, the dicey thing with this is basically so many game studios, developers, etc., business models essentially to make games as service games that sort of like have high engagement that you're trying to get the player to. It's a war over attention, right? Attention of the player, and if they're only going to play your game for like 3 hours a week, that business model becomes really hard to pull off, right? So that is going to be. Yeah, it's not great for the game studios who are attracting, or relying on revenue from China. So,
which is many studios now. I mean,
pretty
this
much
feels like
most of the industry. Right
yeah,
now,
this feels like a form of trade sanctioning almost, and it'll be wild to see how it rings out. I wonder.
The thing is, it's not going to be just China either. Like India has basically the same mentality.
Did
Like
they?
they essentially banned PUBG because they felt it was not aligned with their values as a country, sort of thing. And then I guess Bluehole or Crafton or whatever figured out some way to get the government to loosen up, and I think they renamed the game or something. I don't know. There was like some changes they did to open it back up, but in a lot of these up and coming emerging markets, there's a lot of challenges with like ethics and morals and stuff. It's not as laissez-faire and libertarian as like say the U.S. or the West. So
Yeah, and the U.S. seems like the capital will out one way or another, and it's interesting to see these sorts of rules be able to exist. I can't imagine the states doing something like this.
Oh, I was gonna say I would love to see some sort of like similar mandate to like doom scrolling social media. Can I be limited to 3 hours of that per week as well, please?
For real.
yeah,
Or
I
like
mean,
comparing my life to Instagram or
yeah.
I do
Way
find
worse
this.
than games in my view. So,
Yeah, I do find this to be possibly a bit of a based move in terms of like general geopolitics and kind of like future planning and I don't know, global hegemony jostling with like keeping people on the ball. But knowing kids, knowing people liking games, I'm sure folks will find ways to circumvent it. Like you can't just stone cold cut people off and suddenly I'm taking the other 10 hours a week I was spending on games and I'm like, writing a novel or attending a martial arts class. Like it doesn't work that way. So as we all know, from times we've left WoW before, we got a few more news items, but I feel like we're running a bit long. Do you all want to just kind of move into the progression topic, or is there anything else?
yeah. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay. So yeah, intrinsic versus extrinsic progression systems is something you wanted to discuss. You mentioned season resets when we were workshopping this a little bit. It does really seem like these extrinsic sorts of progression systems are just everywhere now, and fairly unavoidable, at least in like multiplayer games. And I wonder if that's always the case. First, maybe we should just again define intrinsic versus extrinsic. To me,
yeah.
yeah.
So like an intrinsic reward is something that your reward comes from yourself. You feel good about it. You feel like you've gained mastery. Like winning in PUBG, you don't get a reward for that, right? You get a splash screen that says winner winner chicken dinner, and you get to feel like you're cock of the walk.
Mm-hmm.
That's an intrinsic reward. Extrinsic reward is win PUBG and get 15 tokens. Participate in PUBG and get 5 tokens, or like whatever. It's like you are motivated by a reward and not by like your own feeling of accomplishment. At least that's how I define it. Is there
No,
more
that's
to it?
correct. That's
Yeah.
correct. I mean, yeah, extrinsic is a lot of times like player power, and intrinsic is like mastering the combat, mastering like a game, like for example, like StarCraft, it's pretty much the entire game is intrinsic. There's no sort of extrinsic real rewards. Like there's no bars you really fill in StarCraft. Maybe like on your position on the ladder or something like that. It's interesting because I always see this like complaint all over the place. It's like, wow, why does every game now have like MMO progression? Like every game has like achievements. Every game has gated levels. They have like, bars you fill, like all these like meta game sort of stuff, right? I think all these games have it because they're trying to increase engagement with the game, right? And yeah, I think it's really fast. That's fascinating. I think the season model now of where progression, well, it's not really sort of progression, but yeah, you progress during the season and then it gets reset and then progress again. And it's more about like the economy and like getting rid of inflation in the economy and stuff like that. But yeah, they all sort of like play into each other. And I think progression in games is like something that is like so important and cornerstone to like every game now. Even in that Alien Fireteam game I'm playing now, you play through the game and you level up and then you essentially gain new like perks you can slot, and there's like a talent system, and then there's like daily challenges that you do, and there's currencies. It's like basically every game has this essentially this layer that really kind of came from, I think, really, maybe I'm wrong, but a lot of it came from like RPGs and MMOs, right, Gannis?
Yeah, I also kind of wanted to mention there's a really weird extrinsic intrinsic collision in a game like Valheim, like an exploration game. where the joy and the satisfaction you get is like there is progression to it, right? Like you can't immediately go to the like the field lands or whatever plains and expect to have success. So you have to like do some amount of progression and it comes through crafting or whatever. So there's like a crafting progression, I guess, or like there's like a power progression, I suppose, but it's not like a traditional leveling system or token system or whatever. And I say like, yes, obviously a progression exists in Valheim, but I would also want to say that like the satisfaction that you get from exploration is very intrinsic. And so you're
Yes.
not you progress for the intrinsic reward. Like you have to do the extrinsic shit for the intrinsic reward. And I think that's where the real sweet spot is. That's what like WoW Classic felt like as well. Like I now get to graduate into this new zone because I am now level 20 and I'm excited to leave Red Ridge or whatever. Whereas like when they went into a flat model like leveling system where you could go anywhere, like they removed that kind of intrinsic reward for gathering the extrinsic the progression system.
And really, a game has to have a good, healthy mix of both. If it's all extrinsic, or sorry, if it's all intrinsic, it will just feel kind of maybe hardcore. Like it's just all about mastery. It's all about getting better, right? If it's too extrinsic, if it's all just about filling bars, then you kind of feel like the game is like a job. It feels like all I'm doing is just ticking boxes and doing the little daily things and upgrading this or that. But then like the core player combat system or whatever it is, this doesn't feel like that meaningful, right?
I'd like to challenge the notion that it's a mastery-based thing normally. I think a better word to use is satisfaction. Because if you look at like nurturing games, Stardew Valley, you just get a sense of satisfaction. Like there is kind of story progression that happens that plays out, of course, along the timeline, but the gameplay that you get is the satisfaction of building up a farm, learning about these new people, interacting with these new people, making it more efficient to run your farm or whatever. So it's more of like a satisfaction thing than it is like a mastery thing. And so in the cases where you're talking about high levels of satisfaction, yeah, it's a purely intrinsic game doesn't wouldn't actually feel very hardcore. It would feel like the opposite of that. Actually, it would feel super super casual.
It can. Yeah, it's not universal. Like, if you think about maybe the game Flower or Journey or something like that, that's a game that's pretty much all intrinsic. So it's all about immersion and just like exploring around and not about like filling bars necessarily or any of those sort of things. So yeah, it could also be that as well.
But yeah, certainly in a game like StarCraft or PUBG, like it's all intrinsic and it's all hardcore.
Yeah, like Street Fighter or something, right? Like there's no like sort of meta game there or systems that the player is really filling bars with or doing. But even roguelikes, right? Roguelike games are essentially just like trial and error. And if you kept failing, just keep trying again. It's all rote sort of mastery, right? But now a lot of roguelikes are sort of like, yeah, you fail, but then you get some little bonus, you get some little perk or some kind of power up for the next try. And it kind of lets play. It's more it adds like accessibility layer to make it's more accessible for the player to keep trying. And now he can overpower it. And really, WoW Classic was that. Like if you raided Molten Core and you failed, you came back next week with better items because people farmed dungeons or got potions or whatever it is, and it got easier and easier. And so it was more accessible for players who just weren't as skilled, right? And so I do think it's progression and that part of the game has a real role to play in the game.
This does feel, it reminds me a lot of, just to randomly throw it back to like 1960s social sciences here, this feels a lot like, are you familiar with like the Marshall McLuhan concept of like hot media and cool media? This concept that like some media require much more input from, the person using them, like a book might be like extremely cool media. You have to really imprint your own imagination and do a lot of the legwork to summon up the experience out of this book. But something like the television or these days the internet, a lot of the internet would be very hot in that it's like really just filling in all of the cracks of the experience for you, and you can consume it really passively. And it really does feel like these intrinsic games are reward systems are the ones that require like the most of your own inborn human capacity to just feel rewarded and get addicted to learning and want to explore. and imagine what's next. And the extrinsic systems are much hotter in terms of just, nakedly forcing these goals on you and filling things up with bars. It also strikes me how much extrinsic, when you first described it, Candace, at the top of the episode, sounded a lot like the way that people used to just describe gamification back when people started throwing that word around in I don't know, the Farmville era.
Peloton or whatever.
Well, yeah, exactly. I've got a 3-week streak on my fucking Quip toothbrush of using it for 2 minutes a pop. And I think in those situations, those are added, like you said at the beginning, Chris, because what's measured, can be tracked. And so it's not just there to get you to use it more, but it's also because it provides a lot of data, for companies to make decisions off of. Otherwise, you'd have to do these soft polls of trying to figure out how satisfied are people with our toothbrushes, right? And it's difficult to sort of make confident market decisions off that as opposed to pointing to numbers. So it does make sense that more of these have bled into games as games have become more and more expensive to make because they're points of telemetry, right?
I just think it's just part of the monetization model, and in kind of not monetization model, but to make the game successful, and if you want players to play it, especially if it's a service game or whatever, and the number of hours a player plays games are really important, you really want to have some sort of progression loop and system like that. What I think is fascinating about progression is just that it's ubiquitous everywhere in really the human experience, and it's such really tied to the way that we view the world and our ego, and if you told someone hey, you could join this job, and basically you'll never get a promotion, you're just always going to have this sort of salary, and let's say it's a really high salary or something. It's just there's just this sort of mentality of oh, well, I'll never really go anywhere, I'll just stay this forever, right? And it just really comes from really the human experience, and now you just see this in everything, car wash vouchers you get, or like I said, Peloton, or workout apps, or that 10,000 steps a day, whatever it is, right?
Yeah, if you think about it from a macro level, it's such a dehumanizing experience as well. It's you're not the agent of your own choice anymore. You're going to be guided on this ladder of small, less impactful decisions, in the hopes that eventually you get your free car wash, or you get the badge that says that you brushed your fucking teeth every for 30 days. When really the intrinsic reward for brushing your teeth is well, my teeth don't fall out, and I feel good about the fact that I have good oral hygiene. Whereas, so see, it feels like you could simply for the intrinsic people who want to brush their teeth more, you could just show them the data of how often they brush their teeth, and they could become aware of oh, I actually do skip brushing my teeth more than I think I do. I should brush my teeth more. But instead it's no, fucking, we're gonna give you a badge for the first time that you fucking brush your teeth for more than 30 seconds. And then we're gonna put you on this treadmill, and then we're gonna churn you like the fucking patron you are. Oh man, I just don't. I'm just again, sorry.
Yeah, this is it feels very adjacent to this other podcast I listen to sometimes called Team Human, with this Professor Douglas Rushkoff at CUNY Queens. He always is talking about trying to stress Team Human. He's stressing still the analog parts of our experience and the art that we create, and throwing around terms like digital colonization and trying to quantize the human experience and things like this, and it really does feel kind of maybe insulting is sort of the right word after a while to see these sorts of systems popped up absolutely everywhere. I think personally, the scale is tipped for me in terms of wanting to see extrinsic systems all over the place in the stuff I consume. As a kid, I loved RPGs. They were the main thing that I wanted to play, and a little bit of spice is fine, but I just feel it's so ubiquitous now that it's actually kind of turning my brain to pulp a little bit, where it becomes harder and harder to just find that quietude while you're playing something and just enjoying it. It's because I'm so conditioned to want the bars. Do you remember Her Story several years ago? The narrative game.
Love that game.
Yeah, it's so good. eventually you just quit. You don't get like a win screen or anything for it. I think there's some music stingers maybe when you manage to untangle the precise story of what's this. It's a game where you're basically like running searches in kind of a crime database, pulling up video footage, and you're trying to solve a mystery. And it doesn't really tell you like you're done. And I remember hearing some people complain about this way back when, where, was it Sam Barlow, the guy who wrote it? I'm pretty sure he said something like, the game's done like, when you're satisfied, basically. And someone said, well, how do I know when I'm satisfied?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah. My dude, that is a question for your therapist. And that's like the human condition right there.
Yeah. I think about that all the time.
It's interesting that all these things come from games. I feel like, someone was telling me like, oh, well, NFTs are so brilliant because it's like artificial scarcity. And I'm like, yeah, but games have been doing artificial scarcity since the beginning. Like that's what it's all about, right? It's like limited number of this. And then, that's why it's cool or whatever. So I don't know, so many like things that affect our lives and products and stuff, just a lot of these concepts come from games, I feel like. But
yeah. As an aside, also, I realized that I said some pretty negative things about progression systems, especially whenever I feel that they're superfluous. But one of the things that I'd like to mention is I'm also not shaming anyone who enjoys a progression system to do something like learn to fucking brush their teeth more. Like if that's what you need and that's what you want, I'm not going to shame you as a human for wanting something to do. Like I need that, like when I want to run. I'm not one who intrinsically enjoys running. I need that C2 5K app and then the 10K trainer in order to keep me on. So I'm one of those people as well. I just also wanted to acknowledge, like, for the people who don't need it, it can feel really dehumanizing. And I think that's whenever a game goes from feeling like a lot of tasks to a job, because your job is also kind of gamifying, either like your pay or your overtime. It's not exactly a gamification, but there is kind of a gamified progression system to having a job and progressing through your career or whatever. So anyway, just as an aside, if you enjoy gamified systems, you keep enjoying your gamified systems, because I also enjoy my gamified.
I mean, I straight up, like, I go back to, I think. I go back to WoW sometimes just to fill bars. Like, I'll just say, I just want to, run around in a stupor and just fill some bars. It feels good. Like, I'm not kink shaming or anything, but just good to recognize where these things are.
It can be used. I mean, progression systems as a mechanic to get humans to do things can be really useful. Like, exercise, like Candace said. It's just sometimes it could be used for bad, which is just like getting people addicted to games that are, there's no real game or any experience there. It's just a bunch of bars and loops and stuff like that, right? Skinner boxes, essentially. But yeah, I'm curious what your guys' favorite like progression systems are, and I open up the floor too if anybody else wants to talk about one they really like.
Segue. Nice. That wasn't me getting ready to speak. Go ahead, Candace.
Oh, the last thing I was going to say was like, it's also like kind of sad that like the pernicious part of this is that if children are raised with the requirement that things must be gamified in order to gain their attention, that's where I think that the real harm comes from. Like when too much stuff is gamified, then we learn to crave those systems and we learn to only respond to those systems. And so, like JFYI parents, don't try not to gamify everything. Addicted to the dopamine or whatever.
Yeah,
that's all.
It's like aspartame, the real good old-fashioned reward chemicals that our brain cooks up from doing things that enrich us and help us learn. I mean, that stuff, that machinery all works, but when you're talking about continually overloading it with these extrinsic systems, that does have consequences over. I mean, who among us in the middle of the pandemic is not maybe considered like, do I need a dopamine detox? Like, do I just need to fucking chill out from screens for a while? Yeah, I think that sort of overload is a real, almost existential problem these days. But
I think it's also important to acknowledge that like some people really do like the extrinsic reward and they focus on the extrinsic reward, and some people do like raiding in World of Warcraft, for example. Like that's a progression system, right? Like you raid, you get items, and you progress, and that's like extrinsic. But many guilds will only raid until they finish AOTC, which that's their like. We have decided that we are good enough. We're satisfied with the game once we have killed the boss on heroic. And so that's like their actual driving goal. that like their intrinsic reward for playing the patch is
Right.
defeating the boss, and like the achievement acknowledging it, yet like yes or no, you could argue that that's like an extrinsic reward, but really like even if the achievement didn't exist, people would want, and they had before Wrath of the Lich King came out, to say like, yeah, we want to kill this boss on 10 man or 25 man.
Yeah, something I posted in the Discord like earlier this week was, this Quantic Foundry gamer profile test. It's kind of like the MTBI thing for gamers, and it kind of tells you what kind of games you like. I don't know how accurate it is. It was sort of accurate for me, but the interesting point is just that different players are motivated by different things, right? There's some players who, like when I rated in WoW, I kind of saw the kind of treadmill at some point, and I just kind of got disconnected from like caring about upgrading gear so obsessively, and I just was more about like raiding with my friends and figuring out tactics for bosses and that sort of thing, right? Whereas some people in my guild, right, were obviously very focused on like breaking DPS meters, getting the best item. They were the ones to complain if they didn't get the drop given to them and all that sort of thing, right? And so these different types of players with different type of motivations who care about extrinsic versus intrinsic all kind of coexist, especially if the game is going to be like an MMO, right? And I think a lot of the job for designers when they're building a game is to think about all those different types of players and try to think about, well, do we care? Do we want them in our game? And if so, you have to kind of like put yourself in their shoes and go, okay, well, if the player all they care about is, improving their gear, well, then now we have to have them some sort of extrinsic power curve. And if they care about mastery, well, there has to be deep kind of systems that they can master, right? And yeah, I encourage everyone to kind of take the test to kind of see what type of player they are. And if I have friends who are there's a type that's called a ninja. The ninja only cares about mastering combat. They're the type of player who would want everybody in arena to have the same gear. Like they think everyone should have the same set, right?
Sure.
And then there is the skirmisher who cares about getting the best gear, going to a BG, and being a god, right? And so two different types of players that can coexist in your game.
In terms of just like a personal favorite game that's balanced, I feel like both of these styles of motivation. I think my favorite is probably Rock Band and, Rock Band 2, Rock Band 3. Those games are pretty near and dear to me. I went real ham in the rhythm game world back in the day, and I loved that there was like just such a solid inbuilt intrinsic feeling of reward that came from, engaging with music, just even listening back to the favorite songs, doing it with a bunch of people around, the physicality of like whacking on an instrument, the feeling of like your reflexes or your fingering, your dexterity improving. It was just like a really satisfying package there. And then the more time that I spent on it, I started to drift towards these kind of score nerd platforms where folks, where you have the entire band optimizing the exact moment to all deploy your multipliers at the same time and, getting hungry on leaderboards and stuff too. And I think the nice thing about Rock Band for me is that it was able to take both of those types of players too, and then ideally propel them into what I think is just like one of the most, glorious intrinsic kind of learning paths that we have, which is picking up an instrument. Like I think it got a lot of people just more engaged with music, thinking about music in a way, subdividing it, segmenting it, and learning to play stuff after the fact. And it was just like a genius contribution to games overall that really blended these two.
Yeah, really great example. I'm really kind of getting fatigued of progression systems that are like, they give you this cool talent, they give you this cool perk, and then, it has like a value, like it gives you it has like a, let's say an eye level essentially to that perk, whatever. And then you keep leveling up or whatever, and then that perk becomes irrelevant because it becomes, replaced, right?
Can you give an example?
Well, let me see what a good example is. A good example from, let's say, WoW is like a really nice item that has a proc on it,
Okay.
but then you level up and then that item sucks now, right?
Okay.
But I can't remember which games do. A lot of games do this though, And so now I see a lot of games doing horizontal progression, where you get more sort of options, and it's less about like one superseding another, right? And so I think that might be a better way to go. There's challenges to that because if it's too horizontal, it doesn't feel like there's any kind of extrinsic curve there. But it's something that I'm more and more noticing and liking, I guess.
Would that be like in something like a roguelike or a Metroidvania or something? You slowly gain horizontal. Would horizontal expansion be like gaining more movement opportunities, like double jump boots, like a chain that can grab onto something, a cape that lets you float, stuff like that, as opposed to just stuff that lets you do more damage to people? They'd be just a kind of
It's kind of
lateral.
like it gives you just different weapons that have different play styles. Monster Hunter does this a lot.
Rather than just like the
Hey,
raw
Reynolds,
numbers.
I brought Reynolds up if you have a progression system or comment that you have.
Oh, hey, I've enjoyed this discussion. I had not thought about games in the way that you had discussed them about the intrinsic and the extrinsic, but it's something that thought about it, the games that I've played. There's been a shift, I think, more recently. I think mobile games do this really well, or a lot, is that the extrinsic things that you can calculate and store in a database and put in front of the player, there's this need to show a lot of data. And there's a certain type of player that really enjoys, like you said, filling a progress. But for players who don't necessarily enjoy filling a progress bar or having the game, artificially pat you on the back because you did something many times over, arbitrarily on your 50th time, you now get some, new player portrait or something. There's something about that it doesn't feel organic, and that games have shifted. Like Minecraft is a kind of a good example of this. When Minecraft first came out, there was no end. There was no kind of point to the game. It was a sandbox. You enjoyed it with your friends. The accomplishments that you gained and the intrinsic value was just kind of there because there wasn't an extrinsic value. But as the game developed, they put kind of, you beat down a tree with your fists, and it's like, oh, you learned how to get wood. I think as someone who values more of the intrinsic experiences, don't like when games put them in my face. And I think World of Warcraft did a similar thing at one point when I think it was in Wrath of the Lich King. They added achievements to the game, and I fell from a high place and didn't die. And it was like, congratulations, you got a thing. And past, I would just say to my friends, like, holy cow, I dropped and nearly died, but I had 1 HP, and it would just interesting because of what occurred and not because I needed to drop from this high of a position so that I could fill the achievement. Does that make sense?
No, I think that totally makes sense. And I think, there's some critique at some point about WoW and other games, other MMOs where people would critique it like the systems feel like mobile game systems, right? And I think what they meant by that was kind of what you're touching on here, which is essentially it doesn't feel like the system and the progression and the bars you're filling like are connected to the broader experience of the game. Like items feel like, oh, it's a MMO, it's an RPG, you wear items, of course you'd get better items, right? Versus a UI that pops up says fill this bar today and you get this, right? Like that feels like it's disconnected from the world, from the core player experience. And I think that's kind of what makes those systems feel like you're saying it breaks you out of the immersion of the experience, and yeah, they feel cheap, I guess.
Right. And I think even in a game like this would be more modern or in a different vein, the latest Call of Duties, you can play them and you can just enjoy finding a gun and a number of attachment combinations that you enjoy and finding what you like. But then you also log in, and on the side of your main screen is your daily achievements. And if you do those things, will give you more XP. And so I think what I don't like is if you don't like doing those things or you don't care to chase these arbitrary goals, you are actually penalized because those who do are rewarded.
Yeah, and there's no way to like opt out of the achievement system. So if you don't like it, you don't have to engage with the system. I'm curious though, and I'm not trolling. Okay, so the example you used of the falling without dying is a great example because you already got a reward by not dying. You're like, yes, I fell. I thought I was gonna die, and I didn't
Right.
fall. You didn't need the game to like recognize that also and be like, hey, guess what? You done good, kid. But I'm curious though, if you were someone who say you had ATS and you worked really hard to get that ATS and you had to make 40 friends to get that ATS and you had to farm for many weeks or whatever. I'm not sure if you know what ATS is, but it's like a legend.
Yeah.
It was like one of the first legendary weapons.
The staff, right?
The staff,
Yeah.
yeah. And then you walked into Karazhan, and then Medivh said, or who was it? Who was it that was like, oh, Neela
Damn,
Saran?
check out that drip. You
Yeah,
got my staff.
Neela Saran would like recognize you. He'd say like, you, Jezebel. I thought I'd never see it again. Would that feel like, would that hit the same note where you feel like the game was kind of like spying on you or patronizing you in some way? Or do you think that it was because it was like this soulless achievement system? Like, sorry, I guess I'm putting words in your mouth, but like if Neela Saran had recognized that you had ATS, do you think you would feel the same way that you felt whenever the game recognized that you fell 70 yards without dying?
No, and that's actually that's crazy, because in the same way that you're describing ATS, what is the Scarlet Monastery sword, the legendary?
Corrupted Ashbringer, when you would
The
go
corrupted
in there.
Ashbringer, and how it would have that whole quest chain and kind of it never went anywhere, but that, like, not ever having one myself, just watching the videos online and seeing that there was content there that that actually really grabs me. So I think you're right that I think it might be that it's immersion breaking, because one, it values the achievement and recognizes it in an organic and immersive way, whereas the other one has no bearing or kind of representation in the world other than like a menu or a bar or something, and maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I actually wasn't. Might have sounded like a trolling question, but I actually was curious, like, because some people might actually feel like, oh, that's really weird that the game noticed me as a person or something, or like recognized an achievement that I had, and it also like kind of breaks your immersion because you're trying to experience the world, and instead the world is experiencing you. So I really appreciate you answering that question.
Yeah, and I appreciate you framing it in that way, because I have typically thought, well, I don't like it when the game tells me what I should or shouldn't be doing. But then that is a concrete example of where I would definitely want a game to do something like that. So I guess it's a difference in presentation, perhaps.
No, I think that's a
Totally.
good point.
I was just going to observe, and this is like not an extremely high IQ take or anything, but both of those instances you just listed, the ATS Easter egg and the Corrupted Ashbringer, those are both pre-achievement era rewards. And I think that if we wanted to find patient zero for this like entire timeline of, extrinsic rewards in games, we'd have to just basically go back to the 360. Like it probably really just started there. That was the door that could not be closed again,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But great question, great topic, Reynolds.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Z Winter.
Hi.
The Winter. Yeah.
So I have kind of like a bridge, because I feel you start to talk about it. Basically, I feel you're giving progression systems a bad name when I feel there's more something follow you during your adventure. Like if you started with all the powers at the start, it wouldn't feel the same.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it's the journey, right? The journey of the player.
Exactly, and that's a problem with games that now they don't have the journey; they just put it as a grind. Like instead of having a story and something makes you evolve, they just put a grind instead. Like that's more like I feel the easy way they went.
Mm-hmm.
And,
No, I completely. That's a good point.
And that's what I wanted to add. Like that, just what I wanted to add. Like that, the story like is not big enough for many games to have those type of systems. I feel.
Like you mean that the story, it doesn't have enough big hits to necessitate like the need to grind to get those story payoffs?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Like what you just said about ATH and Ashbringer, like those are two big payoff that you can get by grinding, like by doing the content. But they're not like just like grind 10,000 boars. Like you're doing something that gets that story point.
Yeah, it feels meaningful to the player based on like the story of the game or their class or things like that. That's why I felt like Legion was so well received, because so many of the let's say grinds or progressions had to do about your character, about your class, and things like that. So.
Yeah, I think the real beauty of the Atish Easter egg too was that like you don't get the Atish so that Neela Saran will call you cool once in the game, right? Like, most people didn't even know that was going to happen. Some people didn't even notice it did happen when they walked in with their Atish, right? But then once you find out about it, like, oh, I have an Atish, you want to like go in there and have him call you cool, Like that's what I did. I was like, I'm gonna go get my Atish from the bank on my alt because I don't play my priest anymore, and he's gonna fucking call me cool because I'm cool.
Yeah.
But
and you did have Atius, right?
yeah, oh yeah. It's on my dating profile.
How the hell are both of you Atiash owners and I'm not, man? I feel so severely outclassed in this podcast right now.
Were you the raid leader or guild leader too, Candace? Or
I was a raid leader, yeah.
Oh, okay, I was a guild leader, so that's probably why we got it.
Clutch.
Hashtag gamers. All right, Kruger. What question do you have? Thanks for your question, Z Winter.
Hi. So I would like to get your opinion on. You touched briefly on this topic in the discussion, but it's basically horizontal versus vertical progression in a game, and I mean, of course, specifically World of Warcraft here, but it could be. You could look at this for all MMOs, basically. So in WoW, the progression is pretty much 100% vertical. There's nothing horizontal about it. You go from patch to patch, you get stronger, and you pretty much never do older content. So one patch gets outdated as soon as the next one comes out. And I've seen, for example, I haven't played Final Fantasy myself, but I've seen a lot of people playing it right now. It also has, from what I've seen, it also has a vertical progression system, but it works much better because you go through the whole story, including from the beginning through all the different pensions which came out, and you do it at a meaningful level where everything is scaled up to you. And so there's a lot more content, nothing goes wasted, where, for example, in WoW, 90% of the game is wasted. So I was thinking of whether or not you have any take. Would a horizontal progression system be able to be made in World of Warcraft? Like, here's an interesting thought experiment. If you, for example, if the next patch introduced absolutely nothing into WoW, except for scaled everything from every expansion to max level, including all the items, all the raids, all the dungeons, everything. And you remove tier sets, so you wouldn't just farm one place for every single item. And so, for example, for, I don't know, a warrior, he would have one best in slot item from Molten Core, one from, I don't know, somewhere in Wrath of the Lich King, and so on. So everyone would be doing everything because everyone would be needing something from some place, And I mean, for most of the people who already play World of Warcraft, the question is, why would you want to do, for example, Molten Core again? Well, you wouldn't, but the thing is that you don't want to just hold on to already the players you already have. You want to bring in new players, and most of the new players will never experience the stuff that's already been done, And I just feel that if you did something horizontal, it would bring a lot of new players into the game because they would have much more stuff to do than they have currently.
An interesting thought experiment. Like, what if everything you did in WoW rewarded you the same? Like, what if you could do Molten Core and get best in slot rewards? So there would be a lot of overlapping items, but let's just have a concession to that. Like, Borderlands has like 1 trillion items, and there are some really good items, there are some not really good items. So let's just pretend that WoW is Borderlands, where like there are like hundreds of thousands of procedurally generated items, and some of them can be good. And then you could get them from anywhere. Anything you do in the game could drop these legendaries, like Diablo or something. Like, you can open a chest in Stormwind, and there can be like a best in slot legendary. So then, how would motivation change in the game? And I feel like WoW would then just become an exploration game, where if the Shadow Isles opened up, or if Shadowlands opened up, then you would go for the novelty of it. But then, like a Diablo game, you would fall back to whatever the easiest way to get those extrinsic rewards were. but at least whenever new content was introduced, you'd feel like you'd want to like master it in some way. Maybe you wouldn't though. And then the hard part is like it's a social ass game. So if you can't get enough people to want to fucking do, Antorus with you, and by the way, Antorus is way harder than Molten Core just because by sheer number of mechanics, sheer number of things you have to learn,
Yeah, of course, yeah.
then you're gonna have a really hard time finding people to play with. But could that actually be a really good thing for the game? Because then the people that you do find to play with you are people who really want to do it. They're the ones that want that intrinsic reward of finishing Antorus. But then you could always find like a million people to go run Molten Core or whatever. Be an interesting that's like one of those things that I wish like if WoW had put like experimental servers up where like we're going to try making a fun game mode or like we're going to try making a roguelike and just like expire it after a season. Like it would be really funny if it was like literally everything in the game can drop all best in slot items. Loot is 100% random. How do people play this game go? Like I would love to fucking see the data on that.
Yeah. I mean, they've toyed with that in the past where say, especially in Legion, where basically, or in BFA even too, it's like everything gives AP and it gives different value based on how long it takes to do and how challenging it is. And you can kind of just choose whatever you want to do just to get AP, right? What I've kind of found is that one, it's hard to balance the reward per activity, right? Because it's not everything has a different difficulty. It has different time commitment. If you're talking about arena, if you queue an arena, you get the match really quickly. But if you queue a heroic dungeon as a DPS, it could take 20 minutes to get it. So how do you balance that, right? So there's a lot of challenge to do that. Not saying it can't be done. I don't want to nitpick this vision. I think it's a good vision, but just kind of spitballing some of my experience of trying to like tackle that. And the other issue too. Yeah, the other issue too usually is that there's a tendency for a player to only do one thing they like and ignore everything else in the game. And kind of the designer always wants the vision is like, most players dabble in everything, right? And it's all about the holistic experience. And that's kind of why it's like, do your dungeon daily, do your battleground daily. They're trying to nudge you to do multiple things because the vision is like, well, the best experience, the best way to play the game is do a bunch of variety of things, right? So.
Right, but I like to challenge what you just said because WoW is an extremely social game. Yes, it would be very hard to balance it. I just don't think you'd need to. Like literally, if all loot was just random, you could get a level 45 warrior chest piece that's like best in slot when you're level 60 or whatever. And you're like, oh, I have no need for this item. But what if you left a little, like, leave a loot bin in zones, and then like it's just fun to like scavenge through what people have gotten. Like it could be like a really the second thing I wanted to push back on is like people will do the same stuff over and over again if you tie an extrinsic reward to it that is guaranteed. Whereas like if all loot was just random in World of Warcraft, and you could just play, like, especially with how big of a virtual world World of Warcraft is, I don't think that everyone would just chill in, like, Westfall for their whole life. I think they'd be like, I'm bored of Westfall. Now I want to try to see what this other zone is, or, like, whatever. I think they'd actually move more through the game than if you tried to give them a random bonus for doing some content in the game. Like, if you were to just take them completely off rails, and of course I have no, like, proof for this, but I don't think people would do the same thing over and over again. I think they do the same thing over and over again because it's efficient, and their intrinsic joy is finding efficiency.
I mean, we saw
maybe
this.
That's okay. Maybe you're just like super open. You just let them do whatever they want, and then you just embrace that hardcore. That could be true, but it is a real phenomenon. Players will just do whatever the path of least resistance is, and then complain that's a bad experience.
I think the purest form that we saw this play out in is probably early Legion, before they had really realized like the limits of the degenerate gameplay that could come from people spamming, mob plus 10s or what have you. And that was a case where, the legendary drop chance was distributed throughout everything that you could do in Legion, but people solved the equation, and then that's what people were doing. And I suppose to figure out if, as Candace said, people would eventually just be like, I'm not doing that shit anymore because it's not interesting. Maybe we just needed to let it run for longer to see if people burned out on mob plus 10s. Like, I don't know. Because when I try to think of like how, I think anecdotally, according to the type of player, someone in WoW is, they might look at a system like that and feel like it's still going to go according to their tastes. Like I might have, for example, I never had an issue with having to spam islands in WoW because, well, first off, I'm not the type of player that needed to be like on the absolute cusp. I'll solve for like, until there's diminishing returns. But also I feel like I would just say like, dude, islands are so fucking boring that I don't want to do them, period. And I would just not, it's not like I had to, but there are other people that like, if that's where you got to go, that's where they would go. And I think what I'm more curious about is how does the design of a game, like in this case, WoW, work maybe invisibly to shift players' kind of like alignments on this intrinsic extrinsic balance over time? Like, do you think that, I'm guessing the game, tries to sort of like over time, do people fall out? And so the only folks that are remaining with retail WoW are like the extrinsic chasers because it's like a little bit less social than it was before. Like, has it changed the people who are in it, or has it just like maybe begun to swap crowds if it has evolved? Like, these are all, I don't know. I'm interested in that.
I think that in general, WoW is catering to an audience who actually want to play the game intrinsically. They want to play for the reward of playing with their friends every week. And that's why they'll do whatever raid is thrown at them. They don't want to do the same shit over and over again, obviously, but they want new challenges to face together. But really, like, I log in so that I can play with my friends or whatever, or so I can make friends. Or some people don't. Some people log in because they like to be the master of the auction house, or like the whatever it is that they like to collect pets. Like my mother-in-law likes to play to spend quality time with her husband. Like we have nothing better to do, so we fucking play World of Warcraft together. And that's what I mean. But like, you have to have an intrinsic reason to want to log in, but then to make that thing that people want harder to do, you layer in a progression system with extrinsic rewards. But if you look at a game like Left 4 Dead, you don't get any rewards in that game. The only people that are playing that game are people that want to be there. They either want to be there to do with their friends, or they want to shoot some zombies and they just want to like blow off some steam. So like,
and that's why I always like playing more intrinsic games, because everybody is playing because they want to have fun, and it's not like the stress of like, dude, let's do this dungeon fast. I gotta fill this bar before I gotta go to bed or whatever. You know what I mean?
yeah, and that's the game telling you how the game is fun. Like this game is fun because when you finish a dungeon, you get a reward, as opposed to like this game is fun because you enjoyed seeing all the bosses in this dungeon. Like Valheim. This game is fun because you enjoyed getting to Motor and then kill. Sorry, like spoiler alert, but like you enjoyed getting to like one of the final bosses. Maybe you farmed it, maybe you didn't farm it for like the joy of doing it. You had no reason to farm it. I just, it'd be really funny instead of saying that like loot is random. If you just said like there was no loot in World of Warcraft, how would people play it? I think the people that did play it would be more engaged with the game because they're choosing to make their fun. They're choosing to have a virtual world to hang out with their friends in whatever way. Maybe they're role playing, maybe they're just exploring, whatever they're doing.
I mean, it's definitely a great observation that if you think about the intrinsic, extrinsic, what is WoW really kind of poor at right now? It is, I don't think it's the extrinsic. If anything, there's so much extrinsic, right? It's the
Yeah,
intrinsic stuff.
they
So,
kind of force you into overvaluing the extrinsic. I think is the problem. It's like
yeah.
you can't, if you want this thing, which is called playing with your friends, you need to do all this other shit that we're going to make you do in order to
Yeah.
play with your friends. And so, and that's a treadmill because the more that your friends progress, the more you have to keep up with your friends, et cetera, et cetera.
Man, this
But if there was like
podcast
something you
could go on
do,
forever.
yeah,
And we have drifted so far afield.
Really
even
good
like,
topic, though. I like this.
Me too. We barely even talked about seasons and seasonality, but I think it's easy to look at those as like an outgrowth of this too. Like I would, as with everything, there might be a part 2 at some point. But
I think like the real funny takeaway here is like the tagline is progression systems, the shit that gets in the way of the joy of you playing the video game. Like,
Yeah. Although I do agree with
all
I
the
forget who it
chores you have
was.
to do before the stuff you really want to do.
You're really on that
the bars
Bellular
to
video
fill.
really hit you, huh? Yeah.
I gotta go watch it. I haven't seen that one yet.
It was pretty fucking solid. He had some great turns of phrase in there that stuck with me, like with jobs and work. Anywho,
I was smart.
we'll get back to it, I suppose. But I think it's probably time to wrap it up for right now. Thanks, everybody, for joining us up here again. And we hope to see you again next week and be back on schedule. I mean, I'm not fucking going anywhere anytime soon. Not after that adventure.
Yeah, no more traveling. No more traveling.
No more traveling. We learned our lessons. So same bat time next week. And Chris?
Later, gamers.
Wow. Killed it. Bye-bye.